Today I'd like to talk to you about the intersection of radical Islamist terrorists in Latin America and the drug cartels, and what that intersection or that nexus poses by way of a threat to the United States. There are any number of so-called experts who will claim that the drug cartels in Mexico in particular would never involve themselves with militant Islamists because that might ruin their business, that in some way, any sort of demonstrated cooperation between militant Islamist terrorists and the drug cartels would put the cartels under a spotlight or under scrutiny that they could not get away from. And I'm here today to tell you that that is absolutely false. And I want to demonstrate for you with a few examples of just how dangerous that nexus between militant Islamist terrorists and the drug cartels really is. And so, like anything else, to really understand the background or how we got here, we have to touch on a little bit of history. And so you can identify Islamists in Latin America going all the way back to the 16th century. And I don't want to spend time talking about that, but what I will focus on is the early 20th century, where you saw a substantial increase in refugees and people just seeking a better life in Latin America coming from places like Lebanon and Syria. And because you look at the demographics there of Lebanese and Syrians moving to Latin America, what that really means is that you have Shia Islamists moving into that area, and that particular strain or brand of Islamism lends itself to what we now think of as Hezbollah, or the militant Islamists of the Shia branch of Islam. And so Hezbollah has developed a significant presence in Latin America, particularly what's called the Triple Frontier, which is an area between Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. And they've been there for decades. I think most prominently they've really gotten coverage and been talked about in the terrorism and transnational criminal world starting in the 1980s. There's one particularly strong family in that region called the Barakat family. It's more of a clan, really, of people, all really headed up by one particular man named Assad Ahmad Barakat. Tremendous amounts of money, lots of corruption, lots of smuggling, money laundering, all those sorts of things, but with a unique linkage to Hezbollah and the idea that Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, they like to make money. They like to finance their terror operations through illegal means and activity. And so as you move north towards Mexico, over time you find that Hezbollah increasingly has a presence in Mexico. And as a vivid example of that, Hezbollah operates a counterfeiting operation in Ciudad Juarez, directly across the border from El Paso, Texas. I can give you the street. It's Waterfill is the name of the street, in a warehouse in Juarez. And the counterfeiting operation there focuses mostly on $20 and $50 bills. The warehouse itself is protected by the Sinaloa cartel. So there's this incredible marriage of convenience between militant Islamists who seek to make money to fund their operations, and a drug cartel which provides the muscle to protect the cartel's operations and the militant Islamist operations. And so here we have a case where the federal government has known about this counterfeiting operation now for literally years. Homeland Security investigations, the Secret Service, and the FBI all have an awareness of and the exact location of this counterfeiting operation just across the border. And for whatever reason, they've decided to do little or nothing about it. What is important, I think, for you to understand is that the cooperation between the Mexican cartels, who are interested in moving anything that's contraband, whether it's people, money, drugs, weapons, and the terrorists are not, it's not a mutually exclusive thing. It's a marriage of convenience. And so over time, we've seen things like reports from the State Department going back 12 years to 2004, where the State Department discusses how they know that there's 2 Arab cells in Juarez that specialize in smuggling Arabs into the United States. This is a State Department record from September 2004. They talk about how Adnan el-Shukr Juma, who was the Al-Qaeda Director of Operations for North America, was known to be in Agua Prieta, Agua Prieta, Sonora, right across the border from Naco, Arizona. How the regional security officer in Juarez was sent out to buy newspaper, basically wanted ads, seeking any information about Shukr Juma and what he was doing. Shukr Juma, of course, was profiled in our documentary, The Sun City Cell. And for those of you that are interested in seeing the documentary about a narco-terror ring in El Paso and their plans to conduct a truck bombing in Chicago in 2009, I recommend to you our documentary, The Sun City Cell. I think you'll find it fascinating, and it goes into great detail, really expanding upon what we're talking about here today. And so there's this connection between militant Islamists, Hezbollah, but not them exclusively, but certainly Hezbollah very prominently, and the Sinaloa cartel and others. I've discussed previously how the New Jalisco cartel, New Jalisco Generation cartel, is actually really an offshoot of the Sinaloa cartel, and they imported Afghanis and Pakistanis into Mexico to help them with two things. One, improving the quantity and quality of their poppy harvest for greater heroin production. And secondly, to provide training for the cartel armies. And that's evidenced by the New Jalisco Generation cartel successfully shooting down Mexican Army helicopters. That was quite a leap in combat power and effectiveness. And it was documented in the Wall Street Journal in May of 2015. So this has been ongoing. One last point I want to touch on is how militant Islamists make their way into Mexico and how they sort of establish themselves. And I'll give you one brief example. The port of Tampico, Mexico, which is on the Gulf. Militant Islamists make their way to that port by any number of ways, most often by way of Cuba or the Dominican Republic. When they land in that particular port, there are handlers or sort of enablers, facilitators, who get these guys documentation. And for about $1,500, Mohammed becomes Manuel. And the $1,500 gets them legitimate Mexican papers. So what they do is they bribe Mexican officials to produce legitimate birth certificates with all the proper notations and stamps, all the seals, and that helps establish their identity. These folks are then moved into the interior of Mexico, where they're given clothing, language, training in culture, all the things needed to survive and operate in Mexico, and also to make them part of that human wave of entry into the United States. And so it makes it extraordinarily difficult for our law enforcement and intelligence services to identify or select those persons who've entered the country, entered Mexico this way, because they have an entirely new identity. They've received language, culture, training, clothing, all the things to make them blend in Mexico. And essentially, it's like trying to pick a raindrop out of the ocean. There's this wave of humanity crossing the southern border, and these folks are embedded, and they have operating cells. We know of two of them, at least in Juarez, documented in State Department records, that help move these folks into the United States. And we know that there's a nexus between the terrorists and the cartels. And so this poses an incredible danger to the United States, and it's one that public officials are very reluctant to admit or discuss. While Director Comey of the FBI has said that this is nonsense, ironically, the new incoming Secretary of Homeland Security, General Kelly, has discussed this and acknowledged it as a weakness. And the current Southcom commander, Admiral Tidd, has also gone on the record discussing how our porous border And this very dangerous nexus between militant Islamists and the drug cartels poses a great threat to the United States. And so the takeaway today for you is to understand that this exists, this problem, this connection between militant Islamists and the drug cartels, that it poses a grave threat to the United States, and that it really requires the attention of a new incoming administration. Thanks for watching. This is Chris Farrell on Watch.